is a quick video looking into the ballot initiatives for Minneapolis for 2 November 2021. Let's start with the easiest one. Question 2, replace police department with Department for Public Safety initiative. Replace the Minneapolis Police Department with the Department of Public Safety. Mayor nominates, City Council approves the commissioner, and remove language from the charter, including minimum funding requirements and the mayor's control. No is status quo, keeps it the same, doesn't prevent other things from happening later. This is specific to a ballot initiative. So there are many other things that can still be done regardless of this initiative. But let's talk about where this came from, because the history of how something gets onto the ballot, it can come through the council or it can come through a citizens initiative. And in this case, we do have a citizens initiative, yes, for Minneapolis. I want to draw your attention to this Open Society Policy Center. You should know who founds the sister organization Open Society Foundation. You should understand the potential implications with Antifa and other organizations as it relates to this initiative, because the propaganda you're receiving in the mail is possibly funded by the same organization as fanned the flames last year in this city. That's number 2. But it's worthwhile looking even a little bit further and digging into how this citizens initiative became the way it got to be for tomorrow's vote. So, what I want to call your attention to, by the way, the supporters of this and the detractors matter little to me, because it shouldn't be on the ballot, in my opinion, based on the history we see here. There's some other people pontificating about it, including Arredondo, the chief of police, who would be removed from his post on a yes vote. Again, only listing 4 of the 17 mayoral candidates there. 17 candidates for mayor. Consider that. Once again, look up the Open Society Policy Center, understand who's behind that and where they also donate around the world. Look into these other organizations and look into the donors from the side of the no camp as well. So we finally now get to some of the history. You see a pretty famous name there. The path to the ballot. This is what's most interesting to me. And this is why I say this shouldn't be on the ballot. So, yes, for Minneapolis. Again, look into who is funding this organization. They needed a total of 11,906 valid signatures. That's 5% of votes cast in Minneapolis in the last statewide general election. That would be 3 November 2020. Very infamous, possibly the crime of the century. Now, they turned in over 25,500 signatures on May 14th. And the city clerk has 10 days to verify those signatures in this citizens initiative process. The city clerk finds 14,101 signatures were valid. So that's good if you're yes for Minneapolis, because you got 14,101, which is greater than 11,906. But interestingly enough, if you do this math, 25 less 14, there's more than 9,000 of those signatures that they submitted that were invalid. So I would want to know, how did they have more than 9,000 invalid signatures on this initiative petition? Like, that seems like a large percentage of invalid signatures. And if you read this further, you then get into the background of the language, and there's two lawsuits here. Yes for Minneapolis versus Minneapolis, and Samuels versus Minneapolis. And what ends up happening here is that the explanatory statement, well, let's read this because this is important. Let's slow down. You can pause the video and take a look at the text there. But then we had a lawsuit over the ballot question being misleading. Note that this ruling came on September 7th. Plaintiff is saying the ballot question excluded several effects and was therefore misleading and vague, and the defendant said the ballot question did not need to include information on each individual effect and was faithful to the measure's substance. So the result of this is really interesting, right? Because what's really being fought for here, in my opinion, is whether, oh, and by the way, we get one more. We get Samuels v. Minneapolis too. Now, what ends up happening here is that you, the voter, what's being fought for in these lawsuits is over whether you're going to have informed consent on what you're voting for here. And to me, that's really interesting. It's really interesting to me that Yes for Minneapolis brought that first suit, because especially after they were missing 9,000 votes, 9,000 signatures, or 9,000 other signatures were invalid. Pardon me. They bring the suit, and ultimately the explanatory note that you see on the ballot tomorrow on the 2nd of November is going to be what it is. But the question for you is, are you going to understand what that ballot initiative entails if you vote yes or if you vote no? In the case of you voting yes, down the road, if something goes the way that you weren't expecting, but that is in keeping with that ballot initiative fine print, that is your responsibility. But the effect of these lawsuits, in my opinion, is to reduce the informed consent that you may have as a voter going ahead and casting that vote for an initiative. And so that's suspect to me. That's suspect to me. On top of the organizations behind or who have funded part of this initiative. And remember, this is a citizens' initiative. It did not come through the councils. Could not make it through the council. I believe otherwise they would have done it that way. So I think that's enough on number 2. So let's step back and look at question 1 and question 3 as well. So here's an overview. Question 1 has been described in the media as the strong mayor question. Here it's described as the executive mayor and legislative council amendment, which I think feels more accurate. So it brings you back to the understanding of the framing. Framing really, really matters because it's trying to set your frame before you even decided to look into it. In other words, if something's on the ballot, then it's important. But when we look at the history of how the Citizens Initiative came to be on question 2, we can see that maybe this didn't belong, this kind of question didn't belong on the ballot. That even of this 25,000 people that signed this petition, 9,000 of them had invalid signatures. To me, there's a number of reasons that those are invalid, but that deserves questioning. Now, in the case of 1 and 3, a couple of quick notes that I pick up here. The first is that 1 to make an informed decision on this, needs to understand how the executive commission here functions. How does this executive commission function? Then you can decide if you like it to stay as it is or if you'd like to make this change. But then if you want to make this change, you better look into what are the details of that change. I'm not providing any answers to the test on this video, although I've given you what I've thought about number 2 pretty loud and clear. As for this final one, question 3, allow for rent control amendment. So who in their right mind would ever vote against, something which is promoting fair, affordable housing? This is how it has been pitched to me constantly. Every day as I receive something in my mailbox. But by now, we've all, certainly in the last 2 years, seen enough propaganda to be able to detect it and ask the questions that need to be asked. And for me, what's most interesting about this is that we have, I believe, we have laws against increasing the price, increasing the rent, illegally, arbitrarily. And so ultimately, I'll cut to the chase. Ultimately, what I think happens if this goes yes, and this is part of the informed consent and thinking through the downstream consequences and really thinking about this strategically. I've already shown you how, in question 2, how strategic these organizations were to make this a citizens' initiative, to go through the lawsuits, to, in my opinion, try to prevent you from making an informed decision. So down the road, you can say, you know what, I didn't understand that ballot initiative. I just voted the way my friends were voting. It sounded good. No, be an informed citizen. This is part of the process of us doing the research, asking the questions, and holding our government accountable, holding our elected officials accountable once we elect them. So in this last case, what happens if the city council can enact rent control by ordinance? It means that they can say, you know what, landlords here in Minneapolis, you no longer can raise your rent. What is a profit-seeking landlord going to do if you can no longer make profit? By the way, there's certain regulations and red tape and so on, zoning, that make it such that he may have to raise rents in order to stay in business in that particular area. Well, he probably just sells or closes down or bulldozes. Now that housing, which was affordable, right? It was affordable. And it was just going up by a little bit. Maybe it was going up by a lot, you know? But now, those people have to move out. And where are they going to move? They're going to move someplace more affordable, outside of the city, collar counties. So think about this strategically. Both parties are in real trouble from my perspective. But if we just look at the general election, the DFL outside of the metro areas has a hard time winning. And I think the GOP is struggling in Minnesota to show real leadership. I mean, there's so many Republicans in name only, so many. And America First candidates from whatever party going forward are going to win elections. And candidates that haven't called out the FRAOUD are going to be asked, why weren't you talking about this last year once this continues to come to light? But if you can move people to areas where you're losing, that's a great way to start winning. Does this ultimately have that downstream effect? Does a vote yes here ultimately have that downstream effect? Well, the only way to find out is to vote yes, I guess. But I think we can find some precedent for this happening And I believe there are some strategy guides out there which talk about this exact thing. Question is, are you going to be digging for that to confirm my speculation? Or are you going to say, you know what, Eric, I think that sounds crazy. And, I'm just going to go with my hunch on this one instead. I'm just going to go with the convenient option. Instead of following that hunch, I'm going to go with the convenient option, which is to do what I've been asked to do by someone else without properly thinking it through. We have to work together to think these things through. Because in so many cases, our government is not on our side. And that's been proven over these past couple of years. And you can find so many examples throughout our history, even here in America. But it's really important right now because enough of us understand that we can do this research and we can learn. We can improve how we think about these things. We can figure out what our vision is. We can ask questions. We can hold elected officials accountable. Accountability is going to come for you no matter what. There's something called divine karma, divine justice. And people tell you who they are. They show you who they are too. But you also have your own volition, your own will, and your own free will and ability to shine light on things. So use it. What other choice do you have? What do you think is going to happen if you just sit back? So take some ownership of this. Think these things through, ask the questions, do the research. The internet is an amazing place. You can find almost anything you're looking for. But ultimately, you're not looking for an answer to a test. In this case, on number 2, what I wanted to know was, should have this even been a question on the test? Should my professor have even been allowed to ask this question in the first place? How did he sneak this question on there without talking about it during his lectures? Because I was at every lecture. So why wasn't I prepared? You can be prepared, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results going forward. If I end up voting, I'm very suspicious of these voting machines, as you can probably surmise. And they're going to be done away with. We're going to have a new election process. Maybe it's a blockchain process going forward. But we have a lot of work to do because we have a lot of people who, like myself, are still learning exactly how this was done to us. There's over 100 ways that one can cheat in Minnesota, according to Rick Weibel over at Midwest Swamp Watch. If you get a chance to listen to him speak, I would go attend Midwest Swamp Watch /events. Big plug for him because he's done a ton of work to talk about these issues. And he was actually the one that alerted me to this question 3 and got me thinking differently. This is not necessarily a question about affordable housing at the end of the day. It's a downstream effect. What is a downstream effect? And with that, thank you for your attention and happy researching. This open source intelligence is here for all of us. We can use the information available to us, and with that, we become more powerful together, and we can build the city we want to have. We can build the relationships. We can elect leaders who are actually leaders. I'm excited for the future, and I hope you'll be there with me. Take care. Godspeed, everybody.